So, like I said, we were, great, now my whole train of thought is gone. So we went through the hill difficulty, then we went to the Palace Beautiful, and we saw the lions. We've seen the arbor. We saw in the Palace Beautiful, we met all those different characters. And then from there we went into the Valley of Humiliation. We met Apollyon. We went to the Valley of the Shadow of Death, and we saw those weird characters and things, right? So that was kind of more the descriptive end of the Pilgrim's Progress. You're going to see a lot of that coming up here and there. Different stories where the picture itself does the teaching. There's also significant sections of narrative, of dialogue between characters, where they're going to talk about things. And that's where we are with Faithful. He'll give us little pictures, but it's primarily a big set of dialogue. And that was for a couple reasons. Number one is that's when we think of fiction, that was for Bunyan's Puritans the only acceptable form of fiction that they would allow. Any kind of fantasy, like The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, would just be thrown out by a majority of the Puritans at the time. They didn't accept that kind of fiction as anything profitable at all. So Bunyan, writing the way he wrote, actually pushed the boundary quite a bit. But the dialogue would be considered pretty normal in terms of fiction for Puritans. Basically just two characters going back and forth about things of the Lord. And this is also one of the reasons why when they try to take Pilgrim's Progress and make it into a movie or a play, it generally doesn't work as well, because a significant chunk of the story is characters just dialoguing back and forth, and that doesn't make good cinema, right? So just two people talking is kind of boring. But anyways, that's an aside. So as we come to Faithful now, we're going to talk a little bit about fellowship. And then what we're going to spend the majority of time on the next 2 weeks is talking about Faithful's testimony. Who is he? What does he struggle with? What did his walk look like to bring him to this point? Now, one obvious question, who's ahead, but who started first? And we got to figure out what happened there and why that happened. Okay? Now, as Christian went on his way, he went to a little ascent, which was cast up on purpose that pilgrims might see before them. So that's a beautiful thing. So basically, Christian, after going through all these trials, is given a little bit of a hill so he can begin to look and see what God has for him in the future, right? God is not letting him just have to walk by faith and never giving him any kind of encouragement. He gives him a little bit of a preview. Here's what I'm going to take you through. Here's kind of some of the stuff coming up. And in this case, up there, Christian went looking forward. He saw Faithful before him upon his journey. So as God brings him out of this trial and he's able to look, he finds a friend, right? And that's a big deal, because we already saw when he went up to the Palace Beautiful, he had all these characters start to add to his life. Charity and prudence and so on, they all added to his life. They gave him a new character. They gave him more virtues than he had when he entered in. Well, the same thing with Faithful. Faithful is the idea of fellowship and how it enriches the Christian. When Christian was alone, he slipped down into the valley. He was pinned by Apollyon. He was about to give up. Now he's going to get a faithful friend that's going to help him through a lot of the trials that they're going to face. Okay, not all of them. They're going to have some other issues, but they're going to get through it. Then said Christian aloud, "Ho, ho, so ho," which is just, yeah. "Stay, and I will be your companion." At that, Faithful looked behind him, to whom Christian cried again, "Stay, stay till I come up to you." But Faithful answered, "No, I am upon my life, and the avenger of blood is behind me." Now, that's kind of an interesting statement. So first of all, let's think about what Christian's saying. Christian looks forward to Faithful, who's ahead of him, and he says, "Hey, wait up for me." Okay, I mean, that seems reasonable, right? But we're in an allegory. And what are the two rules that all pilgrims have to continue on? What are the two easy, basic rules for each of the pilgrims? Yep, stay on the path and keep moving. So what is Christian asking Faithful to do? Stop. The only time you're allowed to stop is when God puts a rest stop in the way. Okay? And they're like the palace. That was a place to stop. When we get to, you'll see the river of life. That's a place to stop. There will be places for them to stop. But this isn't one of them. And so Faithful says, I can't stop. I can't stop. What that's picturing is the idea of if you're not moving forward, then you're not progressing in your holiness. You're not growing. And so Christian basically is asking faithful to stop growing, stop his maturing, so that Christian can catch up to him. Whether that's in learning, whether that's in holiness, whatever it is, he wants faithful to pull back a little bit for him. Okay? But Christian, so faithful says, this is an interesting way he puts it. No, I'm upon my life, and the avenger of blood is behind me. Now, what is the avenger of blood? You guys ever heard that term?
Sounds spooky.
Mm.
Isn't that from the Old Testament when you had someone at a manslaughter case, and you have a relative try to chase after
Right.
The defendant, and they run to a city refuge?
Exactly. So if you commit a murder, even if it was on accident, the family member could come and pursue you and bring you to justice. They were the avenger of blood. And so your only hope, if you had done this, would have go to one of the cities of refuge. There were six or seven cities of refuge. Now, when you were in the city of refuge, you were completely safe. They could not harm you. As soon as you left a city of refuge, what happened? Open season again, right? So you were bound to stay in the city of refuge the rest of your life if you wanted to be safe. If you came out from the city of refuge, again, they could take hold of you. And that whole idea is it's not an official type, but it's a type of Christ, right? You're safe as long as you're within him. As long as you're within his fold, within his sheepfold, within the walls of his grace, nothing can touch you. But as soon as you decide to leave him, if you decide you're going to leave him behind and walk out into this world on your own, nothing's safe. Nothing's safe, right? So that picture is kind of what faithful is referencing here. I am upon my life, and the avenger of blood is behind me. So he's afraid that he's being pursued by the avenger of blood. Now, it's an allegory, so we're not talking about faithful having committed a murder and now he's trying to get away. Okay? So who is the avenger of blood that faithful is running from?
I don't throw out the obvious, Satan.
Okay.
That's not it.
Good. When Christian fought Apollyon, what was some of the things that Apollyon said to him? Remember?
You're a traitor to my
You're
country.
a traitor to my country. Which means that you were supposed to be under my jurisdiction. You're leaving. And what did he say? A king does not lose his subjects easily. Right? So what is faithful running from? Satan, Apollyon, this world, whatever it is, faithful knows that he has left this behind. He has left that sinful nature behind. He has left his, we'll see him, we'll meet him as he goes through his testimony, all of his characteristics, all of his pride and arrogance and things that he's left behind. And he knows that if he stops moving, if he stops progressing, if he stops maturing, guess what's going to catch up to him? All those things that he's left behind. All the worldly temptations, all the worldliness that he's trying to leave behind will catch him if he decides to stop. And so he looks at that as the avenger of blood. He's got to keep running, because if he doesn't, they're going to override him and they're going to destroy him. So he's got to keep moving. It's an incredibly wise way of looking at it. So he tells Christian, I can't stop. There's somebody chasing after me. I got to keep running. And we have to take that same kind of holy attitude towards our life. When we decide to take a vacation from the Christian life, when we decide holiness is no longer really that dire of a pursuit, well, guess what's going to happen? Guess what's going to overtake us? Because our biggest enemy is what's inside of us, right? Our biggest enemy is ourselves. I know we like to have spiritual warfare, and I understand that Satan has engineered this world to tempt us and try to destroy us and take us off track. But ultimately, what really will destroy us faster than anything else is our own heart. That sinfulness that we retain. That sinfulness that reminds us of why we came to Christ. The sinfulness that Christ covers is the same thing that will derail us if we let it take hold. Okay? So we've got to keep that battle. We've got to keep moving. There are no vacations from the Christian life. At this, Christian was somewhat moved, And putting to all his strength, he quickly got up with Faithful, and did also overrun him. So the last was first. All right, so let's kind of take that in order. So when he saw that Faithful gave him a good word, what did that encourage Christian to do? Pick up his pace, which would picture what?
Spiritual growth.
Spiritual growth. Of what nature?
Consistently, when he's gone for a run, it's always been out of his own strength.
But what did he do?
Probably tried
In
to
real
increase
life.
his learning, maybe.
Yeah, so he started reading his Bible more. He started praying more. He started going to church. He starts getting involved in ministries. He starts going and he starts doing more. He's advancing in his Christian life quite well, right? But the last statement is what's telling, right? So the last was first. Now, what's the problem with that statement? First, it's not the heart. He went from being behind to being in front. Okay? But the way that Bunyan puts it, the last is first.
It reverses the order Jesus gave.
That's the problem, right? When did Jesus say you're most blessed? When the first becomes the last, right? When Jesus washed the disciples' feet, he was first, but he became last. Well, here we have Christian quickly becoming first. Then did Christian vaingloriously smile because he had gotten the start of his brother, but not taking good heed to his feet, he suddenly stumbled and fell and could not rise again until Faithful came up to help him. So he looks back and he sees Faithful and he realizes that he's actually more advanced than Faithful in his knowledge or anything else. And then just as he looks back and gives him a little sneer, falls face first on the ground, right? And more importantly, he falls face first on the ground and he's stuck there. He can't get up. Under his own weight, he's stuck on the ground. Okay? Don't try to analyze that. It's not the laws of physics. It's just the fact that Bunyan's illustrating. He fell on his face and he's down. Okay? Why? Because of his pride. Because when he started running and he started putting his own effort to it, his goal was not to become closer to Christ. His goal was to become ahead of Faithful. So instead of realizing that God's holiness is the standard, Faithful became his standard. And once he passed Faithful, he looked and he thought, oh, I've really arrived. And that's when he falls, right? Just when he arrives. Now, this is important. Until Faithful came up to help him. Now, a guy goes by you, thinks he's really smart, gives you kind of a that sneer, that smug look as he goes by, and then he trips and falls, right? What's the normal, justified reaction that we would probably all laugh, applaud, told you so, yep. But what does Faithful do? That's important, right? Number one, Christian couldn't get up by himself. So Faithful puts all that aside and goes and helps the brother back up to his feet. He restores the man. He realizes what went wrong. He saw him go by. He was the one that got the little smile, right? And yet Faithful puts all that aside, forgives him for his attitude, and then helps him back to his feet and helps him to make progress again. So you see that forgiveness in spite of the fact that this man deserved to fall. And he did. But we don't leave him there, right? No child left behind. All right. Then I saw in my dream that they went very lovingly on together and had sweet discourse of all things that had happened to them in their pilgrimage. Now that's important. So what was the majority of their talk about? Godly things, more specifically, their testimonies. What had happened in their life? What was God doing in their life? We can't get caught up in the idea that it's always selfish if I talk about myself. When you're bearing testimony to the Lord, that's not selfishness. You are exalting God. You are bringing him up. Now, if it's all about you and your struggles, that's a problem. But if it's your life and how God is working in it, how God is growing you, how God has been faithful in the midst of all these things, that's not selfish. That's beautiful, right? So that's what they're talking about. Then I went in my dream, lovingly and together. Christian began, my honored and well-beloved brother, Faithful, I am glad that I have overtaken you and that God has so tempered our spirits that we can walk as companions in this so pleasant a path. Now, just as we begin talking about faithful's testimony, Christian is going to struggle a lot with pride and depression, okay, and despair. That's going to be his pet sins, if you will. I think it's fair enough to say that everybody has got certain sins that they're going to struggle with more than others. It's not to say you don't struggle with everything. We all run the gamut to a degree, but there's certain things that each of us is going to struggle with a little bit more than maybe somebody else. So some people I know really struggle with anger. Obviously there's some people that struggle with lust. Some people struggle with body beautiful, right? And those same people, the body beautiful, may not really struggle with anger. They don't really get completely filled with rage. The people that struggle with lust, and then there's other people that don't struggle at all with lust for the most part, but they really struggle with the worldly attitude towards money. So I'm saying is there's kind of certain things that you struggle with more than others. Bunyan for himself really struggled with assurance that was born out of depression. He would get depressed and he would convince himself that God no longer loved him and that he had walked away from grace and he was under the righteous judgment of God. And so he struggled with that fairly regularly, as did actually a number of the Puritans. But I think what happens is that Bunyan, as he goes and he meets more and more of these faithful Christians, he realizes that not everyone else struggles with that. And Faithful is one of those guys that he models around that. He's looking at it and saying, my character Christian, of course, is based on Bunyan's own life to a degree. And so he's seeing Christians struggle with despair, depression, pride, that just keeps causing him to kind of in this cycle of he gets up and then he realizes that he shouldn't have made that mistake and he gets depressed and thinks that God no longer loves him, and then God restores him and then he gets prideful and falls again. He'll go through this cycle. But Faithful doesn't have that problem. Where Faithful's problem comes in is that his desire to look good in this world. He's going to struggle with lust. He's going to struggle with hedonism. He's going to struggle with the desire to look good in the eyes of this world. Does that make sense? He's much more about worldliness, sensual kind of issues, whereas Christian's more about pride and assurance. Does that make sense, what I'm saying? Because the difference is going to be what they trip over. And there's certain things that we'll go through where Faithful will say, well, I ran into this, and Christian will immediately say, oh, that's not a problem. You should have just remember this scripture and we're going to move on, right? And Christian knows. He wouldn't have been bothered by that. He immediately knows what the issue is and he would have bypassed it. Faithful, on the other hand, can't help but have to sit there and think about it. Does that make sense? On the other hand, Faithful won't even mention certain other things that he just kind of passed by because they didn't tempt him. He didn't have any issue with those. Either God didn't bring him into his life, or Faithful just looked at it and said, I need to avoid that. And he just avoids it and keeps going. Okay? So you're going to see that with all of us. There's certain things that I'm going to stumble with, and there's certain things that you're going to stumble with. And the beauty is there's certain things you won't stumble with, certain things I won't stumble with, and together we balance each other out. That's the beauty of fellowship. When we're sharing our lives and investing in each other, my strengths can help you, your strengths can help me. When I'm weak, you can help prop me up. When you're weak, I can help prop you up. That's the idea of the body. That's why it's important to continue to have the whole, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, is out of context. You need people. It's not about seeing how the minimum number of people that can get together before God is among you. That's not the goal of that verse, okay? The goal of that verse is completely different. The point of Christian fellowship, the reason that this is a body, the way that Paul describes it, is for us to come together, whether it's 1, 2, 10, 450, and to join together and to invest in each other, to share our strengths, to share our fruit, not because we're perfect, but because you're not me and I'm not you. But together we make something more than just 2 people. Does that make sense? That's the beauty of marriage, right? That's the beauty of marriage. 2 people that become one and that are kind of almost superhuman in the way that they join. Okay? So, that's why we get to see Faithful, and Faithful is going to be really cool. You're going to like him. You're going to be sad when he goes. Faithful said, I had thought, dear friend, to have had your company quite from our own town, but you did get the start of me. Wherefore I was forced to come thus much of the way alone. So again, we see that question of if Christian started before Faithful, then how is Faithful now ahead of Christian at this point in the story? We've got to ask that question. Something happened that allowed Faithful to lap Christian. Christian says, how long did you stay in the city of destruction before you set out on pilgrimage? Till I could stay no longer. For there was great talk presently at short time, with fire from heaven, be burned down to the ground. What? Did neighbors talk so? Yes. It was for a while in everybody's mouth. What? And did no more of them but you come out to escape the danger? Though there were, as I said, a great talk thereabout, yet I do not think they did firmly believe it. For in the heat of the discourse, I heard some of them deridingly speak of you and of your desperate journey, for that's what they called your pilgrimage. But I did believe, and do still, that the end of our city will be the fire and brimstone from above, and therefore I have made my escape. Now, in the city of destruction, Christian was just beginning to come under conviction. And he was telling his friends and he was telling his family about what he was feeling and what he was worried about. Okay? Was Christian evangelizing?
Not necessarily.
No. Was he saved? No, he didn't even understand the cross. Remember when evangelist said, go to the cross? He said, what cross? Okay, just go towards the light. Remember, he had to kind of dumb it down for him so he could start pursuing. So the goal here is to look at Christian and realize, even in the city of destruction where Christian was not saved, all he was doing was sharing his burden. But that burden, God was taking it and just multiplying it out, right? The effect of his work. We don't know exactly how he's going to use us. We don't know how far his reach stretches when we just try to be who we are. Does that make sense? Apple came up with the iPhone and the iPod. Between the iDevices, Apple makes some ridiculous amount of money every year, right? What they actually calculated are the makers of headphones, the makers of extended batteries, chargers, cases, all that other stuff that come with it is, I think, a $1.5 billion industry that Apple has created just by creating their own devices, okay? The ripple effect, the halo effect, okay? It's the same idea here. When God uses you, when you try to be faithful to what he's doing in you, we can be amazed at what God will just do outside of us that we had no effect on, that we didn't really try to do, we didn't try to create, we were just there trying to do what God has brought us to do, and here's all the things that are happening around us because God is just multiplying that. His work is he's connecting all these dots that we didn't even know existed. Does that make sense? So here's what was happening. Christian was just trying to deal with God on God's terms in his own life, and yet God's taking that, and now it brings Faithful, and Faithful hears about it, and Faithful starts following. But then we have all the rest of the city, and what were they doing? What could they no longer claim once they heard this news from Christian? Ignorance. They now knew. There was now knowledge in their head that they had to deal with. That's one of the beauties of the gospel. It's going to come up a couple times when we talk about ignorance later on. Again, same thing. The issue is now this two-edged sword of the Lord, right? The word is a two-edged sword. On one hand, it'll spread out the sheep, and the other side it'll spread out the goats. It'll give the wheat and the tares. Does that make sense? It'll separate out. You can no longer claim ignorance once you know. And so this is the same way as doing this. It's separating out those who will believe and those who won't. And it's making it very abundantly obvious. Okay? So even though they all had the same information, even though they all said that there's sin and God's going to judge and the city of destruction is going to be destroyed, they all had the same facts and the same information. What they did with it now indicates their heart and their belief. That's what happens with faithful testimony. It doesn't always work out the best. It's not like a lot of the Christian movies that come out where they just share it and all of a sudden they pray and God blesses it and everybody in the town is saved. Maybe. But it does do, for sure, separates out the wheat and the tares. And that's what happened here. As word goes out, this town starts making fun of Christian. They start talking about deridingly his pilgrimage, how stupid it is, how could anyone go do this? That's just dumb. There's no real danger, there's no real destruction. I'm just going to reject that whole reality. And yet Faithful comes out from under that and says, I know what they were saying, but I cannot get over the fact that this city will be judged, that there will be destruction. And so you start to see there's a black and white difference between those who believe and those who don't. And that's the beauty of that kind of conviction. Okay? Does that make sense? All right, and then see, Christian says this. Did you hear no talk of neighbor Pliable? Now, do you guys remember who Pliable is? We had Obstinate and Pliable. And they were the first two to really go out of the city and pursue Christian and try to bring him back. And Obstinate was the one who said, what are you doing? Just follow me. We're going to go back. And Christian said, I can't do that. Pliable, on the other hand, said, tell me more about heaven. Oh, that sounds so wonderful. Let me come with you. Right? And he started coming with him until the Slough of Despond. And remember, the Slough of Despond was the knowledge of sin. The knowledge of sin that captures, that makes people that are not saved, that will make them stuck with where they're at, and they can't get out of the slough. They won't go back to enjoying hedonism, but they can't go forward to get to the cross. They just kind of stick in misery, knowing about sin and trying to fix it themselves and never making any progress. That was a slough. Pliable, on the other hand, kind of got it on him, but managed to escape and tried to go back to the city of destruction. He tried to go back and enjoy his former lifestyle, right? And he gets stuck. Now, this is interesting. Christian asks about Pliable. Pliable was Christian's first companion. So when Christian asks us about Pliable, what does that tell us? What is Bunyan trying to communicate with a picture of Christian asking about Pliable? Mm-hmm. And what else? Keep going. Where Pliable is at, right? So in other words, there's a love of people that Christian has. Even though Pliable turned back, even though Pliable's friendship was short, Christian doesn't dismiss it. He still cares about the people that were brought into his life. He doesn't just reject Pliable because Pliable rejected him. He still cares about him. And he knows that Pliable has taken his ball and went home. He went back to the city of destruction, and he's now in danger. And so he asks about him because he cares. And Faithful says, yes, Christian, I heard that he followed you until he came to the Slough of Despond, whereas some said he fell in, but he would not be known to have done so. But I am sure he was soundly bedabbled with that kind of dirt. And what said his neighbors to him? He has since his going back been had greatly in derision, and that among all sorts of people. Some do mock and despise him, and scarce will any set him on work. He is now 7 times worse than if he had never gone out of the city. Okay? So what is that saying, if you had to put it into your own words? Pliable started off, then he went back. What's the attitude that's now accompanied him?
You made enemies on both sides of the fence, right?
Right.
Leaving our city and then abandoning the way.
Right. You've left the way, and now you have no more friends. Because the ones you would have adopted and you kept going, you left. And then you rejected the ones that you rejected the ones when you left, right? And so now, but notice what he says. No one will put him to work. Why can't he get work? Nobody wants to hire him, right? Which is what that means. They don't trust him because
he's rejected them.
Spurgeon said, one thing stinks most in the nostrils of this world. Hypocrisy. Hypocrisy. People may have issues with you as a Christian. They may tell you you're wrong. They may ridicule you. They'll do everything else. But the only way that you can make it worse for yourself is if you decide not to be a Christian anymore. because then they will make fun of you for your hypocrisy. People, it doesn't matter saved or unsaved, they hate a hypocrite. If you say you're going to do something, then go do it. Don't sit there going back and forth between two positions. It just drives you crazy, right? The fence sitter, the waffler. We see this in politics all the time. The guy that votes based on, the political wins, right? They're the worst people that to have in Congress, and yet somehow they keep getting reelected. I'm not really sure how that works, but this is the same thing. He can't get work because the people that know him best know that I can't trust you. I can't tell you to go do something and trust that you're actually going to do it, because you tend to go back and forth. You blow with the wind. Every wind of doctrine, you change your position, right? That's a problem. You try to live in both worlds. And so I can't trust you to do either. But why should they be so set against him, since they also despise that for... So he went back, and Christian says, well, why would they hate him? I mean, after all, he just came back to them. Wouldn't they like him because he's now readopted their position? Faithful says, oh, they say, hang him. He is a turncoat. He was not true to his profession. I think God has stirred up even his enemies to hiss at him and make him a proverb because he hath forsaken the way. Had you no talk with him before you came out? I met him once in the street, but he leered away on the other side as one ashamed of what he had done. So I spake not to him. Well, at my first setting out I had hopes of that man, but now I fear he will perish in the overthrow of the city. For it has happened to him, according to the true proverb, the dog is returned to his own vomit again, and the sow that is washed to her wallowing in the mire. These are my fears of him too, but who can hinder that which will be? So he has gone back. We're going to move forward. The whole idea of a dog returning to his vomit, Bunyan loves that illustration. It'll come back over and over again. Anyone that turns back is like a dog returning to its vomit. It's gross. They left it behind, and now they're coming back to try to take it back into themselves. It's really kind of disgusting. We had a dog that eats poop. Same idea. It's gross. Okay. Well, neighbor faithful, said Christian. Let us leave him and talk of things that are more immediately concern ourselves. Tell me now, what have you met with in the way as you came? For I know you have met with some things, or else it would be writ for a wonder. So I know you would have encountered things because I encountered things, and you passed by the same way because we're all on the same path. So therefore, what did you encounter? You would have had to encounter something. Now, implicitly, what is Christian asking him if he's encountered? All the same things.
Have you met the same stuff that I have?
Have I met the same? Yeah. Have you met the same stuff that I had to deal with? Right? How did you get past simple sloth and presumption? How did you get up the hill difficulty? How did you get past the lions? All those kind of questions are basically what Christian's asking. And it makes sense because his frame of reference is his own life. So he's asking, how did you deal with this stuff? And then he's got in his head is all the stuff that he had to deal with. Well, guess what he's going to find out? Faithful had a completely different experience along the same path. And why would Faithful have a different experience? Who creates the experience? God does. And God is sovereign over each little detail. And he moves all the details sovereignly. All the chess pieces are moved around so that everybody deals with their own thing. We'll have common ground, but nobody's experience is exactly the same. Right? My children are painfully making that aware, right, for me, is that no matter what I teach them, they are their own people. And they go through their own life. And they have their own struggles, so they have their own successes. And my high school experience is of little value to them because it's not theirs. And that by itself is true and stupid at the same time because they don't get it. They don't get that high school really is actually pretty much the same thing, right? And they have to deal with it. But they don't think that mom and dad have a lot to really add to the conversation at this point because it's not their high school. And I'm not sure they really believe that we were ever 16. I think in their minds we've always been 40. Well, neighbor faithful, so Christian, let's leave him. Tell him about the things. I escaped the slough that I perceived you fell into. So, how did Faithful deal with the slough? No, he didn't see him. He knew that he fell into it. What did he do? Faithful didn't even deal with it. I just went around it. So already Christian's like, what? That's it? You just went around it? Yeah. I mean, that's the idea, right? Faithful saw it. Oh, that's dangerous. Let me just go around it. And he went along. And that's just it. It wasn't an issue for Faithful. He did not struggle with it. And Christian's sitting there scratching his head going, how could you not have dealt with it? It's so hard to deal with, and it's so obvious that everyone's going to fall into it, right? No, that's just it. No, right? Now watch what happens, though. He got up to the gate without danger, only I met with one whose name was Wanton, who had like to have done me a mischief. Now, while Christian dealt with worldly wise men, Faithful has to deal with Wanton. Did Christian ever deal with Wanton? Nope, never an issue for him. Okay. Now, what does wanton mean? Not wanton. That's a different thing, and that's my struggle with this. What's wanton? Wanton behavior or something like that. What's that?
Without regard.
Without regard to what?
Without regard to care, reason, or morality.
Primary.
Wanton instruction could have wanton behavior.
Right. So wanton is the idea of over and above. It's this idea that I don't care about any kind of reasonableness. I just want to get all in, so you can have wanton destruction, where it's just an outright massacre, right? You can have wanton pleasure, where you just leave everything behind and you're just soaking it up for everything it's worth. You leave everything behind. There's no moderation in your activity, okay? That's wanton. This is Lady Wanton. And so it's typical, although you do get wanton destruction, the typical use of wanton, especially this time, was the idea of lust, sex, immorality. Okay? That was Lady Wanton. Whereas Christian never dealt with her, and guess who comes looking for Faithful? Okay? And mischief, when it says mischief, again, we think of this term as kind of like a little kid doing some kind of silly prank on his siblings, right? Mischief for them was serious. The devil was mischievous. It is somebody who is seeking your destruction. Okay, so when it says that Wanton would have liked done me a mischief, literally, Wanton wanted to destroy me. Okay? It was well you escaped her net. Joseph was hard put to it by her, and he escaped her as you did. But it had to have cost him his life. What did she do to you? So he's talking about Joseph. So what happened with Joseph? Remember, he was in Potiphar's house, and it's almost like a story right out of one of the daily soap operas. He's just working by himself, and all of a sudden Potiphar's wife decides he's kind of cute. She throws himself at her. He refuses a number of times before he tries to walk out. And then, almost comically, she grabs him by the robe, and as he's running away, his robe comes off and the guy runs out naked, right? It's kind of funny in some ways, but at the same time, what's impressive is that Joseph didn't stop running. He didn't stop running. He kept running even without the robe. Okay, and then he's arrested and he's put in prison and so on, because he's falsely accused. But Joseph was hard put to it by her. You cannot think but that you know something, what a flattering tongue she had. She lay at me hard to turn aside with her, promising me all manner of content. Nay, did she promise you the content of a good conscience? You know what I mean. All carnal and fleshly content. Thank God you have escaped her. The abhorred of the Lord shall fall into her ditch. Okay, and from Proverbs 22. Now, two different things. Think about what happened with Lady Wanton as she comes up Faithful. Notice how Faithful's descriptions of her. She had a flattering tongue. She lay hard at me to turn aside, promising me all manner of content. Right? All manner of fleshly content. Now, what makes temptation hard to resist? Bob?
It appeals to something that you desire already.
Right. What makes temptation hard to resist is the fact that it's desirable. If it's not interesting, how hard is it to resist temptation? Fairly straightforward, right? It's not that hard. So temptation by its very nature is alluring. Jerry White says this: what is temptation? Some synonyms for tempt are allure, attract, entice, seduce, and tantalize. Some synonyms for tempted are enchanted, entranced, bewitched, hypnotized, spellbound, charmed, mesmerized, enraptured, and captivated. Each word generates an emotional picture. Temptation relates to sin. We are allured by it. We are attracted to it, enticed by it, seduced by its seeming pleasure, tantalized by the fantasy of what it would be like. So the idea here is that wanton is not just coming up to Christian or coming up to faithful and saying, come and sin with me. Wanton is coming up to faithful and saying, imagine what it's going to feel like when it's all through. Imagine how much pleasure we're going to have while we're in the moment. Imagine how you're going to look, how it's going to feel, how it's just going to be so wonderful if we embrace these actions, embrace these attitudes. Once we're joined together, this is going to be this great, wonderful thing. And that's so many, one of the biggest fears I have for my kids is the idea that they're going to be lured or allured into this world, especially as they go off to college. Once we're not there to help them think through things, do they have the wisdom enough to deal with the temptations that are going to come? Whether that be sex, drugs, alcohol, whatever it is on a college campus, do they have the ability to discern the right way? Now, inherent is there is my unfaithfulness that God will somehow abandon them if I'm not there. So that's my temptation, right? Is to think that if I'm just there with them, I will protect them from all evil. There's a temptation. There's a temptation for me to try to be that uber protector. When realistically, I have to commit my kids to the Lord as I always have and trust that He's going to be a better father to them than I ever could be. That He's going to take care of them no matter where they're at. That their faith in Him will actually grow if it's real. Because He won't let them go. I can't give in to my temptation. I've got to trust that and trust at the same time that He will keep them Himself. Much better than I ever could. And in a way that's more unique than anything I've ever dealt with. Right? So that, you see the temptation on both sides. Can God overcome both? Yeah. He's the answer on both sides of that equation. So same thing with wanton. Now wanton's coming at faithful and pushing hard. And now notice Christian's response. Did she promise you a good conscience? Okay, I get it. He's sort of. Because look what he says. Thank God you escaped her. The abhorred of the Lord shall fall into her ditch, coming from Proverbs. He quickly quotes a verse. So what does Christian not struggle with? He's not a hedonist. He doesn't struggle with lust as hard as faithful does. He doesn't have to deal with this. So for him, when faithful describes what he's going through, Christian answers, if you will, we just talked about this with counseling yesterday, you don't answer emotion with fact. Faithful is describing what it felt like. Faithful is describing how difficult it was for him. Faithful is describing this challenge that he had to go through. And what's Christian's response? Yeah, but she's not going to really deliver, right? Well, yeah, I know she's not going to deliver. That's what he says. I get it. I know she's not going to deliver. But it's not as simple as that, right? Temptation just doesn't get dismissed because somebody tells you the right verse. Temptation doesn't get dismissed just because you know the answer. I know I shouldn't sin. Does that mean that I don't sin? No, it's not that simple, right? Temptation is not that black and white that I can just say, oh, no problem. Same thing. He just quotes a verse. Here's what it's really like. She's coming at you. She's the harlot in Proverbs 22, the harlot in Proverbs 5. So obviously you shouldn't do it. Well, obviously isn't as obvious to all of us. Does that make sense? He's not being sarcastic, but he's minimizing the impact. Does that make sense? He doesn't have a sensitivity. It's something that Christian will struggle with a lot. He doesn't have a sensitivity because he's so black and white in his thinking. He doesn't understand what's really being said because he's stuck with the facts. Does that make sense? So, Faithful says, Christian said, I hope you didn't consent to her desires. And Faithful says, no, not to defile myself, for I remembered an old saying, which said, her steps take hold on hell. So I shut mine eyes because I would not be bewitched by her looks. Then she railed on me, and I went my way. So he didn't give in. That's the beauty of it. But he also knows his heart well enough to know that he didn't necessarily completely escape her grasp. And there's a humility that we're going to see in Faithful, because he knows, well, he doesn't give in. He doesn't take any pride in his standing up. He doesn't take pride in his escaping, because he knows Why did he stop to consort with her in the first place? That's the thing that Faithful is going to struggle with. Why did he stop in the first place? So let's continue. Did you meet with no other assault as you came? What about worldly wise men? That's what he keeps asking. Like, he keeps waiting for, here's what I dealt with. How did you deal with it? So did you deal with anything else? Faithful says, oh, I came to the foot of the hill called difficulty. Christian says, oh, okay, now we're on the same page, right? Now we've both been there. So same challenge. Okay, they're both now facing the same challenge, the hill difficulty. Now, when Christian got to the hill difficulty, he was with formalist and hypocrisy. Remember? Two different kinds of religion. Two different temptations to make it look good, but not really believe in it. Two persuasions that put you at the center of the world, that exalt your view of religion, make you your decider of what's right and wrong. Remember, formalists said, here's the right way to do things. Hypocrisy said, I want to be looking good in everybody's eyes. I'm just going to do what I think is best, the way I think it should be done. Both of them are prideful, self-centered, self-made religion. And guess what Christian struggles with? The desire to be his own boss, to be his own determiner, to be his own sovereign Lord. And that's what he's going to struggle with. And so that's who follows him up to the hill difficulty. So you would think, okay, Faithful, don't you deal with that? When he came to the hill difficulty, he met with a very aged man who asked me what I was and whither bound. I told him that I am a pilgrim going to the celestial city. Then said the old man, thou lookest like an honest fellow. Wilt thou be content to dwell with me for the wages I shall give thee? Now this old man, then I asked him his name and where he dwelt, and he said his name was Adam the First, and he dwelt in the town of Deceit. All right, Adam the First. What does that represent?
The old man, I mean, you have Adam the First, which is Adam, of Adam and Eve, and then you have the second Adam, which is Christ.
Right. And Adam the First he lives in the town of Deceit. So let's put it all together from Genesis 3. Adam and Eve deceived themselves into thinking that God wasn't true to his word. Right? They deceived themselves into thinking that if they just had this fruit, they're going to have everything. They're going to have all the knowledge. They're going to have all the blessing. They will be sovereign over their own situations because they ate this fruit. And the implication is not only just sovereignty, that they're going to be happy. They're going to be able to make their own happiness. They're going to be able to enjoy everything to the full because now they have the knowledge of good and evil. They have everything that God has, and so therefore they can be as content as God is. That was the temptation in Genesis 3. So he comes to Faithful and he says, you look like an honest fellow. You look like an honest fellow. He's from the town of Deceit, which is kind of funny, right? You look like an honest fellow. Would you be happy to stay for the wages I will give thee? What are the wages of sin? Okay, we have our facts, right? This is not, Adam's story is not without, it's not like he's totally blinding Faithful to the truth. There's going to be red flags all over the place that are easy to see if you're looking for them. Then I asked him his name. He lives in the town of Deceit. Why would I trust anything from anyone from a town called Deceit? Right? I asked him then what was his work and what the wages he would give. So what do you want me to do? Adam the First. What do you want me to do? Sinful nature. What do you want me to do? He told me that his work was many delights, and his wages that I should be his heir at last. I asked further him what house he kept and what servants he had. He told me that his house was maintained with all the dainties of the world, and that his servants were those of his own begetting. Then I asked if he had any children. He said he had but 3 daughters, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, and that I could marry them all if I would. Then I asked how long a time he would have me live with him, and he told me as long as he lived himself. All right, so look at his story. Look at his story, because this is interesting. I asked him what was his wages. He told me that he lives in all the dainties of the world, right? Now, he said that his children, his daughters, are the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the boastful pride of life. Now, those are all kind of a big summary for Paul of all the sin in the world. They all kind of fall into those three categories, if you want to. And some of them straddle more than one. All right? And what's interesting is he says you can marry all three, which is polygamy, which is still outlawed in most of the Western world. Right? So it's kind of funny that he's actually telling him that he can commit what is a crime and still have all this world. Okay? Now, as he looks at that, what does it mean that he marries all three of these daughters? They're all sin. And by marrying them, what is he doing? Committing to them. Because what does marriage do? It takes two and becomes one. You are now one flesh. You are adopting, you are holding to, you are receiving, you are joining yourself to each of these sins. That's what he wants them to do. Give yourself wholeheartedly to me. Take my wages. They're great. We have all kinds of friends. There's a ton of people that work for me. They're all of my begetting. Why? Because we all came from Adam the first, right? We all enjoy that same thing. And he can have all the dainties of the world if he just marries these women, if he joins himself to Adam the first. Now, so this isn't dramatically different than Lady Wanton, right? They're soulmates. He's finding this connection. John Piper says the power of all temptation is the prospect that it will make me happier. No one sins out of a sense of duty when what they really want to do is right. They're all enjoying the fact that this has all the prospects of happiness. Okay? Now, as we found out about this, he asks Adam what his wages are. He asks him about his family. He asks him about the job. He asks him all about all these things. What is faithful doing? Being tempted when he should have done what? What was the difference? When Joseph saw Potiphar, his wife, what did he do?
Trying to get away.
He ran. How quickly did he run? Right away. He didn't talk about the opportunity. He didn't talk about what her bedroom was like. He didn't look her over and try to figure out, how great would it be. He just took off and ran. What is faithful doing with Adam the first? He's dabbling. He's thinking about it. He's considering the matter. He's giving it some thought. Not randomly, because what Adam the first is doing is tempting him in all the ways that faithful is weak. Adam is coming in and he's talking to him in his own language, if you will, right? It's the if you go into Micro Center, everyone heard of Micro Center? It's a computer store up on 225. And if you just go and just you don't have to buy anything because everything there is expensive. But if you go in and just sit in the computer section and you listen to the conversations, there's a certain demographic that really, really enjoys that store, right? And for some of you, you'll think, that's really cool. And for some of you, you'll think, these guys are such nerds. Some of these guys, I'm not sure will ever come out of their basement, right? Some of these guys, they're going to struggle in real social context, right? Because you're going to listen to it. They talk their language, though. The most successful sales associates, I guarantee, in that store are the ones that understand the difference. And when you look at a stick of RAM, you see all the numbers across it, they actually know why a 2 is better than a 3, and a 3 is better than a 4, and whether you want this resolution and this speed and everything else. And they all geek out together. And it works, right? Same idea here is that Adam the first and Lady Wanton, they know how to speak to faithful in just the right way. They know what draws them in. They are the art of advertising. Now, let's just make sure we understand. Adam was from the town of deceit. The wages he claims to offer, how much was he going to give him? Well, I don't know, it didn't say. It doesn't say how much. It doesn't say where it comes from. It doesn't say how he gets his wages. Why is that? Because the wages of sin is death. So what is Adam purposely not saying? Here's what's really going to happen. Right. And then Adam's, the whole thing, he says, you can be an heir to my throne. Well, that's great, isn't it? I can be an heir to someone's fortune. What would you ask if somebody said you could be an heir? If I say you can be my heir. To what? How much do you have? And how do I know it's going to last until I can inherit it? Again, that fact is never mentioned. Finally, all the children, he hopes that Faithful will enjoy this idea of having all these children, but children die. So where is this coming from? He takes no, all these warning signs are there, but Faithful continues to dabble, to try to find out, to think about it, and to consider what's going on. J.C. Ryle says, we are too apt to forget that temptation to sin will rarely present itself to us in its true color, saying, I am your deadly enemy and I want to ruin you forever in hell. Oh no, sin comes to us like Judas with a kiss, like Joab with an outstretched hand and flattering words. The forbidden fruit seemed good and desirable to Eve, yet it cast her out of Eden. Walking idly on his palace roof seemed harmless enough to David, yet it ended in adultery and murder. Sin rarely seems like sin at first beginnings. Let us then watch and pray lest we fall into temptation. So what happens here? Well, Faithful Christian said, well, what conclusion came the old man, and to you too at last? Why, at first I found myself somewhat inclinable to go with the man, for I thought he spake very fair. But looking at his forehead as I talked with him, I saw there written, put off the old man with his deeds. That's from Ephesians. And how then? Then it came burning hot into my mind, whatever he said and however he flattered. When he got me home to his house, he would sell me for a slave. So I bid him forbear to talk, for I would not come near the door to his house. So this is good, right? He dabbled with it. He thought about it. His mind was kind of drifting in that direction. And then what happens? He saw a convenient tattoo. And anytime we see a convenient tattoo, who makes it convenient? God does, right? So the Spirit, convicts Faithful of what he's doing. He realizes, I am to run from this kind of attitude. I am to not enjoy this world. I am to run from this world and enjoy Christ. He remembers from Ephesians, it was a well-placed word. It was a faithful saying from the pulpit. It was fellowship, somebody coming up and encouraging him in holiness. Whatever it was, it brought him back into reality. He remembers what he's supposed to be like, and he says, leave me alone. He realizes what it's supposed to be about. And so he comes back and he says, then he reviled me, Adam the first. Then he reviled me and told me that he would send such a one after me that I should make my way bitter to my soul. We'll find out about more of that next week. So I turned to go away from him, but just as I turned myself to go thence, I felt him take hold of my flesh and give me such a deadly twitch back that I thought he had pulled part of me after himself. This made me cry, "O wretched man," so I went on my way up the hill. So what happened to him? He ran from it, right? He turned to walk away, and what happened to him?
Almost sounds like he had a hook in him.
Yeah. And he says, Edward Welch said, when a serpent comes across your path speaking lies, you should run from it or kill it. You shouldn't sit around for a friendly chat. But what did Faithful do? Yeah, and as they talk, they keep taking a step closer, and they keep taking a step closer. And now that he turns to run, what does he, because of his proximity, because he managed to get so close, what did he allow that sin to do? Grab him, squeeze him, pinch him. Now, what is Bunyan trying to picture with that idea of the physical pain? What is the idea of that physical grab? See, the problem with temptation is once you... Exactly. Once you start to conceive of it, once it kind of gets in your head, it becomes 3, 4, 5, 10 times harder to resist the temptation. You can't just sit there and look at internet pornography and decide, oh, I'm going to leave now. I can't just sit there and stare at this woman and decide, okay, I'm done. Once you start to allow those things to get into your head, they're now close enough that they can grab hold of you. And to leave it behind takes physical, almost physical, painful work to walk away from. The alcoholic that sits there and decides he's going to go to a bar. He may not have anything. He may not have indulged himself. But the idea that he can just walk away from that smell, the lifestyle, the promise, is not that simple anymore, right? If he had stayed away from the bar in the first place, it would have been a lot easier for him to stay dry. But walking in and seeing everyone talking, seeing the alcohol being poured, smelling the smells, now to walk out that door is about 50 times harder than it was if he had just never gone in. Well, same thing. When Faithful played with Adam the first and all of his lies, he kept getting closer and closer. And so when he went to walk away because he knew he shouldn't partake in this, now Adam was close enough to grab him and squeeze him. And now it almost physically hurt Faithful to walk away from the situation he knew he had to walk away from. Make sense? But he did. Nonetheless, he did. But he was promised that someone was going to come after him. And that's what's going to happen next, okay? So we'll stop there. We'll finish up this whole section later. There's a couple things that come up in the end that I think are really cool. You'll like them as we go through. What happened when he got to the palace? Because he doesn't decide to go into the palace. So we're going to talk a little bit about what's happening there, why it matters, what Bunyan's view on it is, and you guys can make up your own mind whether you agree or not.